The wagon stood in the middle of the salt flat like a grave marker nobody carved. The sun had stripped its canvas to rags, its wheels sunk deep where rain once pooled. And from 20 paces off, Harlan Beck could tell the stench wasn't coyotes. He tightened his reins, and the mare stamped as if she too caught the bitter perfume of bone. Harlan had seen death before, too much of it. But the way the skeletons sat propped in their places, jaws gaped wide, made his throat close. Every ribcage was a cracked lantern bleached white, and every socket stared blind into eternity. Only one sound broke the stillness, the faint hiccup of breath, wet and small. He spun his rifle toward it, and there she was. The child was wedged between two bodies, hair clotted with soot, skin streaked with dust. Her eyes had none of the scream left in them, only the dim glow of a candle near spent. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just clutched a rag doll stiff with blood. Harlan felt the desert air burn his lungs as questions rose like vultures. Who killed these people? Why spare her? And why here in this no-man's land miles from water? He didn't know yet, but the sight of her tiny fingers curling around his sleeve told him one thing. Leaving her meant letting the desert bury another secret. He lifted her out, bones clattering as she came free, and she pressed her face into his chest. Behind them, the wagon seemed to groan, as though the dead resented losing their last companion. Harlan turned his back on it, heart pounding with a weight he hadn't carried in years. Once he'd been a lawman. Once he'd failed men who counted on him. Since then, he kept adrifting, never staying long enough for anyone to expect a thing. But now, with this silent child against his shirt, he knew trouble wasn't waiting in some distant town. It was already breathing down his neck. A rifle cracked from the ridge, the bullet whining into the dust a foot from his boot. The mare reared, the girl clutched tighter, and Harlan cursed under his breath. Whoever left that wagon of bones hadn't gone far. He mounted, keeping her tucked against him, and spurred the horse east toward Dry Mercy, the nearest town with walls high enough to fend off whatever devils prowled these flats. The wind carried the echo of another shot, closer this time. As the horizon shimmered and the sun dipped low, Harlan understood the stakes. The girl wasn't just a survivor, she was bait. And now, by taking her, he'd bitten down hard. Dry Mercy wasn't the sort of town a man entered hoping for salvation. It was a place where debts outnumbered prayers, where every handshake concealed a calculation, and where the wind carried whispers faster than the telegraph. By the time Harlan rode through the crooked gates with the girl bundled in his arms, the eyes of gamblers, drifters, and God-fearing women all followed him. He carried her straight to Doc Whitcomb's shack at the edge of Maine. The old physician squinted, pipe trembling between yellowed teeth. "Lord above, Beck, where'd you pluck her from?" Harlan didn't answer. He simply set the girl on the cot, her silence louder than any tale. Whitcomb cleaned soot from her face, muttering that she hadn't eaten in days. Harlan saw her flinch at every creak of the floorboards. That night, word spread quicker than wildfire. By sunrise, half the town crowded the boardwalk, craning necks, trading rumors. Some swore Harlan found gold. Others said he robbed a stage. But when the child took a piece of charcoal and scratched wild shapes on Whitcomb's wall, the whispers turned sharp. Her drawings weren't scribbles. They were maps. Wagons circled, crosses marking graves, stick figures with rifles aimed. And in one corner, a face drawn with startling clarity, the heavy jowls of Sheriff Malrick. Harlan studied it long after the others left. His gut twisted. The sheriff was a man known for iron discipline and harsher punishments, a former soldier who carved order from chaos with a bullet and a ledger. But what would a mute child know of him? Why sketch his likeness among bones? By dusk, the answer thundered at Harlan's door. Sheriff Malrick himself stood flanked by 3 deputies and a crowd itching for blood. "Beck," he said, voice low but hard as saddle leather, "that girl ain't yours. She belongs in my custody until matters are sorted." Harlan's jaw set. She survived something none of us can name yet. She stays with me. The sheriff's gaze flickered to the crowd. Behind their muttering, Harlan heard something darker. The hunger of men eager to erase a secret before sunrise. "You got till sundown tomorrow," Malrick said finally, eyes cold. "Hand her over, or we'll take her." When they left, the child curled against Harlan, trembling. Outside, the town buzzed with wagers on how long he'd last. Inside, Harlan opened the small satchel he'd carried from the wagon. Among scraps of cloth and rusted coins lay a thin book, its pages water-damaged and smeared with dried blood. He thumbed through it, and his pulse quickened. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Names, parcels of land, payments marked cleared. And then, pages torn out where the settlers' caravan should have been recorded. The girl's finger jabbed at the gaps, then at the crude drawing of the sheriff. Her meaning was plain. The missing pages weren't lost by accident. Harlan leaned back, the weight of it crushing down. He thought of his past, of the time he failed to defend honest men against a railroad's hired guns. He'd promised himself never again to bear that burden. Yet here it was, clawing at him in the form of a child too small to carry her own truth. Night deepened. The storm on the horizon painted the sky bruise purple, and the wind carried grit that stung the skin. Tomorrow would bring not only Malrick's deadline, but the reckoning of a town built on graves. Harlan checked his rifle, loaded shells, and sat awake beside the child, who finally slept with her doll clutched tight. He whispered into the dark, a vow only the dead could hear. "If they want her, they'll have to kill me first." And outside, as the first lightning forked across the desert, the mob grew larger. By morning, the sky wore a copper bruise, and the wind came mean from the south. Grit scoured the clapboards of dry mercy, rattled shutters, drove tumbleweeds down Main like cattle running blind. Harlan moved the girl before the streets emptied, carrying her quick through alleys to the livery where the walls were hewn thick and the loft stayed cool even in fire season. Horses muttered in their stalls, hooves shifting on hay, their breath sweet and nervous. May Pike owned the place, a widow with a scar at the corner of her mouth that turned every smile into a warning. She looked from Harlan to the girl and back again. "You bring thunder under my roof, Beck. Thunder draws lightning." "Storm is already here," he said. "I will pay for harm. I will work off the rest. I only need the doors bolted and a quiet corner till sundown." She studied him a long beat, then slid a crossbar into place and pulled a chain the size of a serpent through both doors. "You pay in truth," she said, "because if I find you lied to me, I will help hang you myself." The wind howled like a choir of ghosts. Dust found every crack, tasted like ground glass on the tongue. Harlan set the girl on a blanket in the loft and climbed after with a ledger and his rifle. Doc Whitcomb wheezed up the ladder behind him, carrying a kettle and a jar of peaches and syrup. "Got 10 minutes, the doctor said, listening to the distant murmur of a crowd. After that, the street turns to grit and fools. The child's eyes fixed on the ledger before Harlan even opened it. Her small hand tapped the cover once, twice, a steady beat like a telegraph key. Harlan felt his chest tighten. He had slept a little, and in sleep, old faces rose. A boy in a wool cap, a woman with blue ribbon in her hair, smoke where a town had stood. He forced the past down and peeled the book open. Ink had run in places. Blood had stiffened the corners. Names marched in stiff lines across the paper. Morrow, Carver, Till. Beside each name, a parcel measured in acres, and beside each parcel, notations in a careful hand. Cleared, contested, seized for improvement. On the bottom of the page, signatures rested like snakes. J.R. Lannery, Agent for Territorial Rail and Water. S. Malrick, Sheriff, Witness and Execution of Claim. Harlan ran his finger along the word seized. The girl touched that word too, then touched her own chest. Harlan looked at her doll. The cloth had letters stitched in the hem. E.M., he breathed through the dust. Ephraim Morrow, he said softly. Your father. The child blinked slow. Her lip trembled once. No sound came. She put the doll in his lap and pointed to the back of the ledger where pages had been torn ragged. Her drawings from last night crowded his memory. Black stickmen with rifles, crosses in a row. He lifted the cover and found a slit in the spine where a thin scrap had been tucked. He eased it free. It was a corner of a page, small as a playing card, with a seal pressed in wax and a date. The seal was a raven with a length of chain in its beak. The date was 3 weeks past. Rook, Whitcomb said flatly when he saw the bird. Silas Rook. He runs the rail and half the town besides. If you have his seal in a ledger tied to Malrick, you hold a fuse between your fingers. Harlan stared out through a knothole toward Maine. Shapes moved in the copper light. Men with bandanas, boys with jeers. A woman held a baby and wept into its hair. On a barrel across the street sat Silas Rook himself in a dark suit that never seemed to gather dust. He had the kind of face men trusted when they were tired. Beside him stood Malrick in a duster, hat brim low, one thumb hooked in his gun belt. A clatter rose against the livery door. The chain held. May called up without fear. They want the girl. They want you. Sheriff says for the good of the town. I told them good does not knock with a boot. Rook cupped his hands and shouted, voice carrying through the gale. Harlan Beck, you are holding a witness who does not understand what she saw. Dry Mercy is a community. We survive by order. Turn her over. Let the law sort it clean. Harlan answered through the slats. I have a ledger with names that say, the law is a blade, you both hold by the handle. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then Rook laughed as if a child had told a fine joke. You always were dramatic, he called. We hear you were a lawman once, and a poor one. We hear a town died under your watch because you lacked the stomach to lead. Do not make us pay for your ghosts. The words struck like rocks. Harlan felt the old ache twist, felt his hand drift to the inside pocket where a bent tin star lived. He had been deputy in a place called Palo Seco. He had trusted a sheriff with a gentle smile. When the shooting started, he told his men to stand down because he believed in process, while hired guns believed in fire. By dawn, the church bell had fallen, and everything under it with it. Men, women, one boy in a wool cap, and a woman who wore blue ribbon even on bad days because she said a little color could hold a man to the light. He had left after. He had not stayed to bury them, because his knees had betrayed him and he could not stop shaking. That is the man they speak of, he told himself. But not the man I am now. He pictured the child asleep beside the ledger, lashes glued with dust. He pictured the pit her drawings had promised. Doc Whitcomb pressed a hand to his shoulder. There are children in this town, too. If you force a fight, you might bring fire down on every roof. Think, Beck. Choose what harm you can live with. May climbed the ladder and joined them, hair blown wild, eyes steady. I have grain in those bins and oil in that lamp, and horses that will kick their stalls to splinters if this turns hot. If you shoot, shoot sure. And if you show that book, show it to all, not to one. Secrets let men play you. The child crawled to the loft edge and peered down. She drew in the dust with a nail. A canyon with twin spires like teeth. A split boulder with a cross cut into it. A line of stickmen with hats. She tapped one hat and then placed her small thumb where a brim would dip low at the brow. Malric wore his hats like that, pitched forward, hiding his left eye. She drew a circle on the temple. A scar. Harlan nodded. She remembers where it happened. She remembers who stood where. Thunder rolled close. The wind turned savage. Somewhere, a window blew in, and a scream rose that had nothing to do with law. Malric's voice cut through the noise. Last call, Beck. Surrender the girl. Show me the book, and I will guarantee a fair hearing. Refuse, and we come like a flood. Rook added a softer knife. You hand her over and walk free with $50. The town keeps its peace. The rail keeps bringing bread. That is order. Harlan looked at Whitcomb. He looked at May. He looked at the girl and saw the tremble of her jaw and the stubborn lift of her chin. He remembered the boy in the cap. He thought about order. He thought about peace built over bones. He saw a choice that would mark him either way. Do I shoot men I might have drunk with? He asked himself. Or do I hand the past back to the same hands that broke it? He breathed slow. He felt the rifle's weight. He felt the ledger's weight, heavier than iron. Doc, he said, if I fall, you run her to the church ruins on the far edge. The ground is sanctified to some, even now. They will hesitate there. May, if a fire starts, kick the north door and drive the horses through the rain barrels. Keep low, keep moving. May nodded like a judge carving sentence. And you, Harlan Beck. Which path brands you? The one I take, he said. Not the one they choose for me. He stood, rolled the ledger into his bedroll, and slung it across his back. He dragged a feed sack to the loft edge and ripped it, spilling barley onto the floor in a golden tide. He tossed the doll into the girl's arms and pointed to Whitcomb. Stay with him. If I yell run, you run. No heroics. He crawled down the ladder, every rung a drumbeat. Heat gathered under the roof, though no fire burned yet. Outside, dust swallowed the street until men were only shadows, hats and rifles dark against a spinning wall. He set his shoulder to the door and called out, Malric, Rook, I am coming to the threshold. I am untying the chain, but hear me. The first man to step through without orders dies where he stands. A hush fell that had edge enough to cut. Harlan slid the chain through slow, then stopped. The wind lulled. A smell of kerosene pricked his nose. His eyes tracked down to the gap under the door. A thin line of wet spread into the barley he had spilled, drinking it up like thirsty ground. He looked to May. She had already seen it. Her eyes went flat. Fire! She breathed. A match hissed outside, small and obscene in the roar of storm. Someone laughed. Harlan heard the laugh and knew the town had crossed a line it could not uncross. He kicked the doors wide and saw a dozen faces in scarves and goggles, and one man kneeling with a fuse in hand near a slosh of oil that licked toward the threshold. Behind them, Malric sat his horse, hat brim low, unreadable. Rook smiled as if he watched theater. Harlan raised the rifle and aimed not at a face, but at the fuse, at the tiny snake of fire that crept along the rope. He could end it with one shot. But if he missed, the world turned to flame. If he waited, the oil reached the hay. If he fired at the man, he would start the killing and there would be no stopping until the storm blew itself out over bodies. The girl shouted from the loft, her first sound since the flats. It was a single word without shape, A raw cry that might have been Pa or No or Harlan. It hit him like a bell. He tightened his finger. The fuse spat like a mean cat. The oil drank on. The crowd held its breath. Malric put his hand to the brim of his hat and tipped it back just enough to show a pale crescent scar at his temple where no hair grew. The same scar the girl had drawn. Harlan's sight wavered between that scar and the fuse, between proof and flame, between the past that broke him and the present that demanded a mark. He had one breath to choose, and he took it as the match fell from the kneeling man's fingers and vanished into the oil with a whisper like the last prayer of a dying town. The fire kissed oil and leapt in a hungry tongue, bright against the storm-dark air. In that blink, Harlan's rifle roared, the shot splitting fuse and flame with a spray of sparks that died in the dust. The crowd staggered back, cursing. The man with the match fell clutching his hand, and for one heartbeat the line between riot and massacre held. Then the wind shoved harder, driving smoke through the livery cracks. Horses screamed in their stalls. The girl clung to Doc Whitcomb's coat above, eyes wide as plates. May Pike threw buckets from the rain barrels onto the floor, but the fire had already found straw. Harlan shoved the doors wider, rifle aimed low. "Back off," he barked, voice ragged, "or you'll burn with us." Malric's deputies lifted their guns, but the sheriff raised one gloved hand. His scar gleamed in the firelight, pale as bone. "Beck," he called, "you don't understand what you're protecting." These people were trespassers, squatters on rail land. I delivered justice where the courts failed. That child, she's the only loose thread left. The words hit harder than bullets. Harlan felt the ledger pressing between his shoulders like a brand. Whitcomb shouted above the crackle, "It wasn't justice, Malric. It was theft dressed up in law." Rook's voice cut in, smooth and practiced. "Enough talk. Burn them out." Two men hurled bottles wrapped in rags. Fireballs smashed against the livery walls, heat blistering paint. Smoke rolled upward in choking waves. The girl's scream pierced through, high and raw. Harlan ducked inside, coughing, mind racing. He yanked the ledger free, thrust it into May's hands. "Get this to the church ruins." North side. They'll hesitate on hallowed ground. "What about you?" she demanded. "I'll draw their teeth." Before she could argue, he climbed to the loft, grabbed the girl, and shoved her into Whitcomb's arms. "Run, now." He pointed at a broken window on the far side where the storm beat hardest, rain spitting sideways. Whitcomb nodded grimly, clutching the child, and crawled through the gap into the storm's howl. May followed with the ledger tucked tight. Alone now, Harlan faced the door. He stepped through smoke into the street, rifle low, coat smoldering at the edges. The mob parted enough for him to see Malric clearly, the sheriff's pale scar and iron eyes locked on him. "You killed them," Harlan said. "Families. Children. Buried them under the schoolhouse so your town could stand on hollow ground." Malric didn't flinch. "This land belongs to the strong. Always has. Always will." The storm split open then, rain hissing onto fire, lightning cracking so near it rattled teeth. In the chaos, Whitcomb staggered toward the church ruins, the girl in his arms, May at his side. Rook's gaze snapped to them, fury burning through his polished mask. He barked orders, sending riders to cut them off. Harlan raised his rifle and fired twice, dropping 2 horses in the muck. The rest scattered. The mob roared and surged, and suddenly the street was war. Men slammed into each other, fists and blades flashing in the lightning strobe. Harlan fought through, each shot buying seconds, each breath tearing at his lungs. Malric bore down on him like a storm embodied, revolver gleaming. They circled in the mud, thunder their drumbeat, firelight their witness. "You could have walked away," Malric growled. "I did once," Harlan spat, "and it damned me." They fired at the same heartbeat. Malric's bullet seared Harlan's arm, spinning him. Harlan's shot clipped the sheriff's hat, laying open the scar. Malric grinned through blood. Not enough. Behind them, the church bell tolled once in the wind, though no hand pulled the rope. The girl's voice, her true voice, rose sharp as the bell. "My name is Eliza." The mob faltered at the cry. Memories stirred. Whispers of a caravan slaughtered years back, of children gone missing, of graves without markers. Men turned their eyes on Malric, on Rook, questions gnawing through fear. Lightning cracked again, and fire raced along the boardwalk toward the saloon, a serpent of flame driving folk into panic. The storm had turned their own fury against them. Harlan, bleeding and swaying, raised his rifle once more. But this time, he didn't aim at Malric. He aimed at the church ruins, at the shadowed ground where secrets lay. He fired into the earth. The shot echoed hollow, and the ground crumbled, revealing timbers and bones where the schoolhouse pit yawned wide. Gasps ripped through the mob. Women clutched their mouths. Men stepped back as if from plague. The bones told their names louder than any witness. Malric's face twisted, his mask stripped bare. Rook snarled, "Finish it!" and shoved the sheriff forward. And in that moment, Harlan knew. The storm had carried them past return. The next heartbeat would decide whether dry mercy tore itself apart or was reborn from shallow graves. Rain hammered the bones, and the pit sighed, as if the earth itself confessed. Men stared into the hollow ground, faces lit by lightning, and the anger that had driven them began to rot into shame. Harlan felt it. A shiver through the mob, the beginning of a turn. Then Rook snapped the spell. "Seize the church," he shouted, voice sharp as a whip. "Take the ledger, take the girl." Two riders spurred toward the ruins. May Pike stepped into their path with a pitchfork held like a pike. Doc Whitcomb stood beside her with the ledger under his coat, thin and unbending, rain washing the dust from his spectacles. Eliza clung to the bell rope, eyes burning. She yanked it once, twice, 3 times. Each told a wound through the storm. Harlan pushed into the street, rifle low. "Look at the pages," he yelled, pointing toward the ruins. "Listen to the names. Morrow, Carver, Till. Your kin, your neighbors. Men who vanished because these two called murder a kind of bookkeeping." May lifted the ledger high. Whitcomb read in a broken thunder of voice. Dates, parcels, the seal of the Raven, the signature of Silas Rook, agent, the witness of Sheriff Malric. With each name, a head in the crowd turned. With each number, a jaw tightened. A woman pressed her hand to her mouth and sobbed a name that had been a prayer for years. A ranch hand whispered, "God help us," then spit in the mud as if to wash the taste of himself away. Rook saw the turn and bared his teeth. "Lies," he cried. "Forgeries. A drifter and a sawbones cannot break the law with a story." Malric did not speak. He stared at the bones under the storm light, rain slicking the scar on his temple until it gleamed. His hand rested on his revolver. Harlan watched the hand and the eyes and the angle of his shoulders. The sheriff stood like a man who had stood before firing lines and never blinked. He also stood like a man who knew the sum of his choices and could not pay them down. "Face me," Harlan called to him. "Here, in the open. No fire at our backs, no mob at our sides. We end it now. If I fall, they can take the girl. If you fall, Rook faces the town alone." Rook turned on the sheriff at that, fury raw for the first time. "You will not humor him. Bring the girl, and the town will forget by winter." Malric lifted one hand, and Rook fell silent because something in that hand promised a faster death than the storm. The sheriff stepped into the middle of Maine, mud sucking at his boots, rain slicking his duster to his frame. He stopped 20 paces from Harlan, and the line between them cleared as if an invisible broom swept the street. "Draw when you wish," Malric said. Harlan tasted blood where a tooth had cut his cheek. His left arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, heavy as iron. He thought of Palo Seco, of the bell that had fallen, of the boy in the wool cap, of a blue ribbon that brightened the worst days. He thought of Eliza's small hand pointing at the word seized and then at her chest. He breathed once, twice, slow as prayer. "Wait," May shouted from the ruins. "Harlan, the head gate." Harlan turned his head a fraction. He saw it then through the rain haze, the mill race that ran above town, the wooden sluice that carried storm water toward the holding pond, the heavy gate that could drop and send a sudden flood down the drainage that paralleled Maine. Men had built it to protect their foundations in cloudburst season. Men had left it half-rotten this year because Rook cut budget to polish the depot instead. The lever that held the gate was a rusted bar. A shot might break it if the storm's weight pressed enough water behind. Harlan looked back at Malric. "There is fire on the boardwalk. There are children in doorways. I will not let them burn." He lifted his rifle, not at the sheriff, but past him. "We are ending this with water." "Coward," Rook spat. Harlan fired. The shot rang against the storm. The rusted bar leapt, the gate shuddered, then slammed. The mill race coughed, then vomited a slate-gray wall that leapt its trench and found the street. It ran like a low river, cold and fast, bowling ash and embers, knocking men to their knees. The fire hissed and collapsed. The mob broke into islands. The bones did not move. The bell tolled once more by Eliza's hand, steady now. Malric stood his ground in the rising water. He did not look impressed. He did not look shaken. He drew with the slow grace of a man who had practiced more than he prayed. Harlan drew with the quick certainty of a man who had decided at last who he wanted to be. 2 shots cracked so near they sounded like one. Harlan felt his hat leap. Malric rocked back a half-step, then steadied, mouth a thin line. Neither man had fallen. Each had grazed the other, the first to feel out. Malric's eyes narrowed. "You aimed for my hand," he said. "I aimed to end your grip on this town," Harlan answered. "Then finish," Malric said, and came forward through knee-deep water, revolver angling low. He fired, the bullet smashing splinters from a post behind Harlan's hip. Harlan stepped sideways, boot finding a rut that turned his ankle. Pain flashed white. He forced it down and fired for the belt, knowing a gut shot was a slow death and refusing it. The bullet tore Malric's thigh. The sheriff grunted, then advanced again because he had always advanced and did not know how to stop. A third shot, a fourth. The smell of powder cutting through wet wood and horse. Harlan felt the world narrow to the iron sight and the line of Malric's jaw. He saw the scar, the pale sickle, and behind it the first blink. Doubt, not of aim, but of the story the man told himself each dawn. "Stand down," Harlan said. Malric raised his gun. A small shape moved on the edge of Harlan's sight. Eliza stood in the street above the flood line, rain flattening her hair, doll clutched in one fist. She did not scream. She spoke, clear as a bell. "You shot my mother." The sheriff flinched, not with fear but with memory. It was a fraction, but it was enough. Harlan shot the gun from his hand. Metal spun and vanished into the current. Malric stared at his empty fingers, at the water that would not give the weapon back. He looked at Eliza, then at Rook. Rook drew a derringer from his sleeve, small and spiteful, and aimed at the child. May lunged too far. Doc shouted. Harlan fired empty chambers and heard the flat clicks that meant fate could turn on a half-ounce of lead he did not have. He threw the useless rifle and ran. The derringer cracked. The shot missed, knocked sideways by a hand that came from nowhere. Malric's hand. He had moved without thought, striking Rook's wrist hard enough to spoil the aim. The tiny gun fired again, wild. Malric grabbed for it and Rook fired point blank. The sheriff folded as if a string had been cut. Rook backed toward the boardwalk, eyes wild now, lay of the town gone from him. You saw him, he shouted to the crowd, voice desperate. He chose me. He signed with me. We built your fences. We filled your stores. He killed for you. No, May said, voice ringing. You killed for yourself. Rook spun and fired at her, the derringer popping like a toy. The ball burned a line across her sleeve. Harlan hit him then. They crashed into the hitching rail, the flood biting at their boots. Rook clawed for Harlan's eyes and found the bent tin star in his pocket instead. He ripped it free, stared at it, laughed a broken laugh. Here is your law, he hissed. Harlan broke his nose with one hard punch and took the star back. He rose, pulling Rook with him by the lapels so all could see the mask torn from the face. This man sold your dead to a ledger, he said. What do you call that, dry mercy? Voices rose, not a mob now, a jury that had found its tongue. Rope appeared like a bad memory. Harlan lifted a hand. No, he said. No more pits in the ground without prayer. No more justice done in alleyways. He stands before court at dawn with the ledger on the table, with names spoken out loud. Men hesitated. Then heads bowed. Rope went slack. A circle formed around Rook, tight as iron and clean as daylight. Harlan knelt by Malric. The sheriff stared up into the rain, mouth moving without sound. Eliza stepped close, small and unafraid. He looked at her and seemed to fall farther than the bullet had dropped him. I kept order, he whispered. You kept secrets, Harlan said. Malric's eyes shifted to the pit where bones shone pale. His breath rattled, then eased, then stopped. There was no heroism in it, only a final accounting. Harlan closed the eyes with 2 fingers, rain washing the blood from his hand. Dawn bled into the east as the storm broke. Smoke coiled up thin and tired. Water ran away into the arroyo, tugging at ash and spent shells. Folks moved slow as if waking from a fever. They gathered at the church ruins. May set the ledger on the altar stone. Whitcomb tore a strip from his shirt and tied it like a ribbon around the book. A pledge that no page would be torn again. Eliza stood on the step and spoke names. She did not know everyone, yet the town did. So they answered, each voice adding a name, then another, until the air filled with a roll call that sounded like rain on 1,000 tin roofs. Men set hands to shovels. Women set blankets where bones would rest. The schoolhouse pit would be a sanctified yard by noon. Rook shook under guard, fury spoiled into fear. He muttered about courts far away, about friends on the line, about money that could still clean blood from pages. No one answered him. He was not the story anymore. Harlan felt something lift from his chest that had sat there since Palo Seco. He looked at Eliza. She looked back without flinching. He took the bent star from his pocket and held it once, then set it on the altar beside the ledger. I will not wear a badge to make men brave, he said quietly. I will stand where a child can sleep. May heard him and nodded. Then stand with her, she said, and stand with us, if you will. We can make a different kind of town. The sun found the first edge of the graves and turned bone to gold. Eliza reached for Harlan's hand. He took it, warm and small and fierce. Behind them, Dry Mercy faced the day with eyes that had seen what lay under its feet and with hands that knew how to build.